All right, Greg. So for today's conversation, we've got a good one, and it's around the central theme of what problem does this solve, and this is a very that question alone is a very simple thought experiment, thought exercise that you can use in a lot of situations, and we're going to get into that. But I'll give sort of some background on this, and just in general, we've talked about this kind of before. In general, like what we provide is a think with a K, not a thing with a G. But we'll get into kind of like why this kind of keeps happening over and over again in a number of different areas. And so the idea is a lot of organizations will often invest in tools to fix problems, or that are where the problem is actually fundamentally about training, judgment, decision making. We assign a technology to that. Now that's kind of like throughout human history, we've always come up with technological solutions to problems. That's not generally an issue, but the issue is it's kind of becomes the wrong solution. And so we're going to talk about today about why we have that tendency, and why not only is it ineffective, but it can be very often dangerous. And so, me, I watch a lot of, when I do watch TV, I usually watch some
Golden
sort of
Girls.
documentary. Yeah,
Oh,
well, unless my
when
wife
you're
has
not
a
watching
remote,
Golden Girls.
and then we're watching Real Housewives of whatever, which I can't stand, but I also find it extremely informative and very, very insightful into pop culture and society as a whole. But that's a different episode. So today, the other one, I watched one on the Boeing 737 Max. And so there was all these problems with it, right? So Boeing, their 737 Max was developed to compete with rival competitor Airbus's more fuel efficient, larger plane. So rather than designing a new airframe from scratch, having to go through that whole process, massive investment, all kinds of stuff you have to do, what they did was they took their existing 737 platform and added larger engines. Now, the key reason why they did this was because they, pilots who were currently rated and certified to fly the 737 would not have to go through any recertification process. It wouldn't be something long, meaning it could be adopted very quickly. Everyone like this, like, hey, this gives us this new capability. Everyone still has the requirements to continue to fly the plane, so we don't have to change anything. Wow, this is a great solution, and look at what it's going to do for our bottom line. It's basically the same plane. So that was kind of the concept behind it. But the problem with this new design of adding these larger engines is that the placement of the engines caused the aircraft's nose to pitch upward under certain flight conditions. Now, I'm not a pilot, but that's not always a good thing if your nose starts to pitch upward. And so because this design issue, what they had, they said, okay, well, we're going to counteract that, and we're going to create a technological fix. And so they said, rather than, again, spending the time and the money and the resources and pulling pilots offline and getting them trained up and, hey, this is what happens, but you can counteract that. What they did was they just implemented this new system called MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. So the idea was the MCAS automatically pushed the nose of the plane down if it detected that the aircraft was climbing too steeply. Now, once again, Greg, I am not a pilot, but I think for a significant amount of the time that you're flying, you don't want the nose of the plane to be pushed downward during your flight.
I'm not going to sit here and believe that Boeing made a mistake. Okay, so if you're trying to get me to 100, I'm just saying that's a little hard to swallow.
So yeah, well, I don't want to get. I like my life. I like being above ground. I don't want to get taken out by some Boeing team. No, but so here's the thing. Boeing didn't train pilots on the existence of this MCAS system. And a lot of the pilots they found out after the investigation, they were unaware that it was even on their aircraft. So they're flying this plane thinking, okay, yeah, it's the same plane. Yeah, newer, bigger engines, whatever. They didn't even know that there's this thing in there that might push the nose of the plane down. So, it also relied on a single sensor. And if that sensor failed, this system, again, that pushes the nose of the plane down could activate incorrectly. So from this, there were 2 fatal crashes. Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines occurred after this MCAS forced the nose of the plane down repeatedly. Flight crews obviously had no idea what was happening, so therefore they had no idea how to correct it. So people said, oh, it must have been pilot error. It's like, well, no, it's not my fault if I don't know what's going on. I can't diagnose the problem, and let alone, even if I did diagnose the problem, know how to solve it, because no one trained me, right? So the core failure, obviously, Boeing tried to solve a design challenge with automation and software. They failed to invest in training in the human beings who would be responsible for managing that automation. They relied on the tech instead of investing in decision support, orientation, crew readiness, situational awareness, those kind of things. So basically, Boeing gave these pilots a new capability without giving them the cognitive framework to manage it. So it's like, here's this new thing, go out and you'll be fine. Well, that's not how that stuff works. And so the end result of this one, 346 lives lost, worldwide grounding of the entire 737 MAX fleet. Boeing, I believe, lost over $20 billion in costs and legal claims. It's probably even higher than that. And then years of reputation damage in the aviation safety, which then compiles anytime you have any other problem, right? That's becomes the issue. So, like I said, the big central theme of what we're talking about today is just what problem does this solve? That's the central question of today's podcast and today's discussion, and what it's a very simple it's a simple thought experiment to coming up with any new solution, anything. It's like, well, what problem? We often come up with solutions to problems that don't exist sometimes. And when it comes down to these types of decisions, like most resource decisions are made reactively, not strategically. So the idea is, okay, something went wrong. Let's buy something to fix it. Okay, people say they don't feel confident or something's going on. Well, let's buy some gear, right? Rather than investing in our people. Let's go invest in a product, a system, an app, and then just let our people figure it out. So, you have to address some questions, right? Is this fix addressing a root cause or just the symptoms? Are we solving for performance or just for optics, right? And tools, I've also seen, we'll get into this, tools are often used as shortcuts for difficult conversations, or they're used in place of having a difficult conversation. And so really the gear becomes a pacifier, not really a solution. So that's kind of big picture, Greg. And I know you have some other examples there, but I'll stop and let you jump in here as well.
Thanks. So first, I didn't want to have this discussion based on the title. So when I first read, what problem does this solve? The first thing I got is a ponytailed Friday shirt wearing guy in the board meeting that's leaning back and asking that question with his arms above his head with his fingers interlaced, right? And then the second image I got,
that's the guy. That's the guy. But that's the guy trying to sound smart, not actually asking a real question.
Right. That's why I'm trying to describe that.
The scientific term is douchebag.
The same douchebag has inside of his coat pocket, his wool coat pocket, laminated card. And the follow-up question is, how do we scale this? And he has no idea that either of those questions are, douchebag 101, that they're just to make it look like he's paying attention and involved in it. Then I started reading into it. And when I got to the 737, I couldn't believe the numbers. And I couldn't believe it was Boeing. But then you wrote something, and it really stuck. It really resonated. And you wrote that most resource decisions are made reactively, not strategically. And we have a bunch of police officers and law enforcement, corrections, courts that listen to the show or that we know personally. And I would say just change out Brian's sentence just a little. Most resource decisions are made reactively, not strategically. Now let's take that same sentence to the dojo floor. Now let's take it slide stopping up to a police call where shots have been fired and somebody's down and maybe an officer's down. Now let's take it out to the training that we're doing on the shooting range. If we're making our decisions reactively and we're not implementing or inputting the new and incoming information strategically, then we're going to slide directly towards the problem at full speed with no further chance of solving it than we had when we were on the outer ring circling the drain looking at the problem. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you have to understand that if we don't create a cognitive framework for problems, then we're never going to solve it. And Brian, you said that, are we solving for performance or just for optics? Do you remember during this a couple of years ago, within the last 5 years, where police agencies, oh man, you can't have an American flag on your police uniform, okay? That's going to piss some people off. And then we went the other way. Well, you don't want to have shined black boots because that brings in the militant. What we are doing, Brian, is on a whim or on one written complaint or on hearing somebody say, man, that certainly seems like it, it's a point of agitation. We were changing policy. And it's the same answer over and over and over. What thought did we put behind this before
Well,
we decided to go forward and fix it, right?
and and you bring up, kind of reinforcing the point that this a tool can be, when I said, tools are often used as shortcuts for difficult
Yep.
conversations. So rather than having a difficult conversation, we
Yep.
wanted to point to the flag or the
Yep.
boots and say that's the problem. It's
We
like, well,
fixed it.
that that's
No more short
clearly not
haircuts.
the
Come
issue.
on.
Like,
Exactly.
and
You know?
it's like, what does that have? What does someone's shoe have to really do with the situation, or is that symbolizing something larger that alludes to the problem that you're actually getting at, but you don't know how to articulate it? So you can
Okay.
point, but I can point to that. I can point to that thing. You know what I mean? So I say, well, that's got to be it. It's the red hat you're wearing, and it's like, well, okay,
Back
no,
to
it's not.
symptoms.
That's a
Back to
symbol of
symptoms.
something
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
that you don't like. So
Let me give you.
I want to get. I know yeah,
Let me
you had
give
a
you
good
one that's
example
right in
that
your wheelhouse.
spurred
So here
spurred
we
a
are.
memory motion link for me.
Oh yeah, and I'd love you to bring that up too. So I lived through something that most Americans have long forgotten, and let me be the historical record. So
The Civil
uh,
War.
the Civil War, being the musket man. So
Yeah.
there was a thing that came out while I was a copper called anti-lock braking, and they called it ABS. And we had a fleet full of Chevs, and then we had the big gosh damn boats that I can't think of the name of them that were out there as the marked police cars, and all of them, because they were fleet vehicles, they all came straight from General Motors with the ABS on it. Now, there wasn't a warning. There wasn't, by the way, we changed all the systems that we told you about before. They were just on there. And the idea behind it was sound because it was supposed to allow a driver to maintain steering control and shorten stopping distance. And specifically for emergency situations like slippery surfaces, the gravel roads, those type of things, where if your wheels would lock up, you're going to skid and lose control. The only problem, without telling us about it and without the additional training, Caprice Classic and the other one I still can't think of, they put them on the fleet vehicles and said, "Hey, let the gosh damn accidents begin." So what happened is that when you press down on it, you had, first thing that came back was a pulse rate. The pedal would actually push back towards you, and it was a rhythmic pattern like boop boop boop. And then when it did that, it made a clunking sound in the firewall, cluck cluck cluck. And so you thought something failed, and you thought, "Holy shit, the car's falling apart," and you weren't stopping. Well, you were stopping. You were slowing speed and lessening the inertia. But with the brake pushing back on you and that noise, you thought you had a systems failure. So people were just sliding through intersections and ramming the car in front of them and oversteering. Oh my God, I could tell you the story. And we were in gosh damn, what's the name of that little city at 8 Mile in Kelly, Harper Woods maybe, and end of a long pursuit and a dangerous situation with shooting during and after the pursuit. And Rick Bewley came up because we called for another car, and the locals were on the scene. And Rick Bewley had the brand new sled on the fleet, and he was pressing it and threw up his hands to tell us, "I'm coming," and went sliding right through the crime scene and almost killed all of us and took out a light pole. And so we went back to the administration. I mean, this all happened in a weekend, Brian, and we're going like, what the hell happened to our scout cars? And all of a sudden, our supervisors came. General Motors was literally across the street. Came back and said, "Oh, it's the ABS." So we nicknamed them the anti-stop brakes because nobody could figure it out. Now, Brian, with a short amount of time and with all the complaints that we had and all the dangers that happened to them, it evolved significantly because we were speaking directly to the people that were putting them on the cars, and they were going, "Oh, wow, what a great test case." But I would ask you this. I would say, wouldn't it have been great to try a UX experiment just for the hell of it and say, "Hey, let's
Yeah,
put some people out in the parking lot with, like, cones and water bags and stuff." And Brian, that never occurred. And
No,
General Motors are going to get on and say, oh yeah, we did all this. Brian, it never occurred.
well, yeah, they I'm sure they tested it, but
Of
you know, there was
down
no
in.
there was
Exactly.
no there was no sharing of what that would be. No, and that was the thing, because you mentioned that, and I was like, oh my god, I still remember when I was like 16 years old, so you know, hadn't even been driving, well, legally for that long, right? And so I had to lock up the brakes. Same thing, someone cut me off and they jumped out
Yep.
into traffic, and I remember just slamming on the brakes. And at that point, I know the ABS had changed a little bit, but it was like this really rapid brrr, like feeling under your foot, which
Yep.
is really weird. And then, so what did it automatically cause me to do was, oh my god, there's something wrong. And then I lift my foot up, and then I have to put it back down. So the idea was that the ABS is there, you know, it works. You stop faster, because rather than
Yep.
locking up the brakes and sliding through, you actually will stop faster. It's been proven to show that's a better system. But the first time you experience that, you're like, oh my, again, it's so counter to anything you've experienced so far that it's completely foreign. And so, like,
Well,
until you have that experience, unless you have it was just, I still remember that exactly what intersection I was at too, because I almost
so
clipped the
two
person.
two completely different age groups. Brian is much older than I am. Two different things that we like. Brian's a clog fanatic, and I certainly hate clog dancing. And we could go down and say the Grand Marquis. Is that it? It might be. And what happened is we both came up with the same experience. So to me, that's significant, Brian. And
Yeah,
if we
right.
look at another airline thing, one of the things that we talk about in class is that when you think that your engine is stalled, what do? Intuitively, we know that what we need to do is bring the nose down to gain the thrust, the lift, the get the engines going again. And what do though? We pull up because we're afraid of the ground. So your natural reaction on the ABS was to fight the ABS, which was actually doing the work for you. But guess what? If we don't have a mental component and we don't have a training component, then it's going to be like gosh damn Martian arithmetic.
So,
Oh, the Crown Vic, the Crown
and
Victoria was the other one that had it.
yeah, so this is, you know, it's always interesting to me, kind of like why tools are the default. And
Yeah.
so it's really important to understand that, how much it affects us as humans. Obviously, we're sort of primed for technological advancement. That's how the human race has stayed alive. We've had to adapt to some situation to make it easier for the purpose of survival. I mean, it's just ingrained in our DNA. But the tools often become this default for a number of fairly simple reasons. One, tangible ROI, right? I get a return on investment. It's
Yep.
easier to budget. It's easier to understand the cost and what I'm going to get back from that. It's much easier to show off, hey, look at this thing, look at what we bought, versus, well, look at this new capability of our people, or look at how they think now. So it's very, very easy just to point to it and say, there's the camera, there's the metal detector,
Yep.
there's this, we have this thing now. This thing is going to save us. This thing's going to help us. We can rely on it. It's effective. It's been tested. It's been engineered. And most of the time, really good, and does exactly what it's supposed to do. I mean, I'm not bashing the tool or the technology itself. I'm bashing how we use and how we interact with it. And so it's easier to point at something. And then, you know, just because as humans, we have sort of that simplicity bias, right? We gravitate towards solutions that are easier to understand and implement. It's easier to equip a person than to train one. If I take you, right, some random person off the street, and I go, okay, what is this person capable of? But then I put you in a uniform and I put gear on you and I give you a weapon system and I give you all this stuff. Well, suddenly, okay, well, this person, yeah, they've got all the tools they need. It's like giving someone, you know, hey, here's your full, here's your garage completely built out for everything a carpenter would ever need. Wow, this is awesome. It's like, do you have any training in being a carpenter cutting wood or anything? No. It's like, well, that's all useless then. I mean,
Exactly.
it's that part comes first. And so it's I'm not trying to oversimplify that. It really is that simple sometimes. And
Yep.
you know, as you know, with anything, with any organization, it's political safety, right? I
Yep.
can say which I would go one step further with political safety and said it just makes us feel better, right? If I get better gear, right, one, it's a better soundbite, it's a better headline. It's not going to cause friction with people or unions or culture or accountability. It's like, look, I did everything I could. I got my people the best gear out there. It's like, okay, and we pat each other on the back
Exactly.
for that, but is like sometimes it's just done to make us feel better. And a big one, um, it's there's less accountability with that. There's I meaning there's sort of this, I can avoid being introspective and really digging in deep because tools don't challenge leadership decisions. They just don't. Tools
Yep.
aren't going to talk back to you. They're not going to say, hey, this is so messed up or we're being used incorrectly. The tool is just going to do exactly what it was designed to do. And so there's no feedback loop. There's no feedback
Yep.
mechanism. Well, training does that. Training actually says, oh shit, are we doing this right? Is this the right thing to do at this
Precisely.
time?
And
Right? Because
it'll
you're going through the
magnify it.
steps of doing it.
Exactly. It'll magnify it. It'll shine a light on it. So to that end, and you brought up a couple of great buckets there, Brian. And so if we talk about ROI, simplicity, political safety, and introspection, if we just have those to throw some darts at, Nico's a lieutenant on the fire department, so very proud of my son Nico. It's amazing that he has time to do anything with all the fun he has.
Yeah,
So when
I
he
know.
does get to work,
Well, especially now
applaud.
he's got the grandparents to watch the
A
kid and the
babysitter.
dog
The
anytime he
bastard.
wants.
Exactly. So now you're reading me. So give you an example. Federally mandated political safety one, smoke alarms. Okay, and we talk about smoke alarms for commercial and residential, but there's a glaring study that's been around for a good long time that says that conventional smoke alarms aren't effective at waking up children. In fact, only about 20% of the time are they able to do that. Okay, nobody's addressed that yet because the body count's not high enough. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So right now, the return of investment seems to be enough that even though it's a political thing, nobody's touching it. Well, then we talk about introspection. And I wrote down, let's get ahead of this. Can you imagine the first couple of people? And look, homelessness has been around since there's been people without homes. But I mean, if you talk about riding the rail and the old bum, cutting into the wood to say, hey, this place has got good stew, or, watch it, this guy's got a shotgun or whatever else. Cops a long time ago, and military certainly, Brian, you'll remember this, came up with the idea of refugee camps. A refugee camp was a short-term solution for somebody that was displaced by a moment of crisis. And guess what? Those tend to turn into long-term. Hey, we wanted to get ahead of this, but nobody thought, what's the expiration date on this? When does this turn into a pumpkin? This is no longer a good solution. And now the hygiene and this and the waste and the in some of them because of the drug use or the mental health challenge. And what happens is it gets out of control. But Brian, at the beginning, we all had good intentions and we all patted ourselves on the back going in, right? I give you just the one more. I remember when we had to get a new oven. And remember, we live in the middle of nowhere, so we had to order the shit from Denver. That takes a week to get there by rail, and then to find a guy to install this system in our house. And there was a little metal flange that he had installed on the ground and a metal flange on the bottom of the stove. And I was like, what's that for? And he says, it's for tip overs. He said that the old stoves, you could grab them, and when you tried to pull them away from the wall, they would tip over and land on you, and a lot of people died. And so I called horseshit. And then you know what I found out? A child injures themselves from furniture related tip overs every 30 minutes in the US, and a death occurs every couple of weeks from this. So, what it is we don't know what we don't know. So, when you're asking about the problem, okay, if we don't invest a little bit of time to really take a look at what problem we're solving, what we end up doing is solving for symptoms or solving for something that's on the periphery, a spiral. And is that the best expenditure? Look, we're always talking about, I'll give you one gosh damn more. You remember this. Back in the day, I was one of probably 5 in the state of Michigan police rifle instructors. I got certified, went out to agencies, and back then it was the M16A2, the M14, the M1 Garand. Those were the police semi-automatic rifles that people had. Why? Because the agencies were getting them from that government plan. Remember, the government would outsource certain weapon systems, and then police agencies could pick them up for zero. And then what happened is that someone that went through the training that I went through could carry that weapon on duty, and then they came up with the rack where you had the shotgun on one side and you could have your police rifle on the other side. You know what the movement is now? The movement is now, back then, every chief of police hated me. Nobody's going to police rifle. Why would we ever need this? Brian, look around now. Agencies are retiring their REM 870s saying the police shotgun is too dangerous. We have to go to the police rifle. Now, when it comes to research light. When it comes to, I'll vote for the police rifle, Democratic action, or the loudest voice in the room, or some new chief or general that wants to point and say, I brought the military the P-38, that takes lead dog in the sled. And now we get an entire agency retrofitting their vehicles or getting a new decal or doing something else where they think they're on the right path, Brian. But at the end of the day, it's the training that's a missing component. If you invest in training,
So
you invest in your people, you invest
so
in their
that's
cognitive
that's
mind.
that you well that's the whole debate of training versus tools, right? It's
Yeah,
what's the real ROI, what's the real return on investment, and sometimes you do have to quantify that in a way. I remember working with the Army years ago when we were implementing and getting the buy off with the ASAT program, and they had to quantify it and say, well, it'll come down to basically the cost of a new pair of boots, and it's
that's
like
it.
when you see it that way, you go, oh, okay, like that's tangible. I can understand that. I can use
Yep.
that. But the idea about the training versus tools and what the real ROI is gear is just this. It's an at bang solution. So it can enhance your execution after a decision has already been made. It does not affect whether the decision was appropriate. So we're gonna fast forward that. Okay, this is gonna happen again. We're gonna likely run into this. So this is how we're gonna respond to it better, right? I mean, that's basically what you're saying, because buying something that helps improve your reaction time tells me you are accepting that the situation is going to happen again, and you're making a choice. We're not going to do anything about that. We're just going to wait till it happens again, and that's what we're going to do. And so that's the concept between training is that left of bang investment, right? It teaches when to act, how to assess, why certain behaviors emerge, all of that stuff. But it's have you trained people to identify the situation where the tool is even needed? Have you shown them to recognize ambiguity, risk, and prevent indicators? Because if we're not doing that, then the tool just becomes it will eventually become another problem, another issue, we're eventually going to have to get a new one. You remember? Oh, did you send it to me? It just reminded me because you brought up the smoke detector one, but one of the fire alarms where they said that they wanted to cut down on people pulling fire alarms,
Yep.
just for no reason at
So it
all.
grab
So
your
this
hand and
one, you
lock
reached
you to
in,
the machine.
it grabbed your arm and locked you in. So now you're sitting there watching, a school start on fire, and then
Yep.
you got to choose: do I let everyone know, or
Yep.
do I
Yep.
and burn to death, or do I not
It
not pull the fire
handcuffs you
alarm and save
so we don't
myself?
lose our witness. Think of that, Brian.
And we go, we do, well, that's so stupid. It's like, no, but that's the first iteration, or that's how these things work. It's going, okay, here we got this new thing, and we implement it. We don't realize like the second, third order effects. We don't say what else could happen from it,
Yeah.
and so that first model, there's going to be errors. The MCAS system in the 737 fixed the problem. It just, no one knew that, right? It solved the issue that had been created by putting these new larger engines on and changing where they were at on the wing or whatever. It solved that problem, but it created it created disaster. It created catastrophe that was all completely avoiding things. So it's like those questions, that's the kind of heart of the matter to start
Yep.
with.
Yeah, and I would add this. So I don't remember the name. My memory's gone now, folks. I'm sorry. Fentanyl's a hell of a drug, Lois. What's the gear turn-in point called for your TA-50 in the Marine Corps? Remember the place that was out at Penn where you had to go and there was a
The
shipping
the
thing and
this
it,
SIF, the
yeah,
consolidated
exactly,
issuing facility, the SIF.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you know that I used to for Combat Hunter back in the day. I used to have to trek across the country with my little Sharpei Jaeger, and Jaeger had a buddy, and I can't remember his buddy's name that worked for the Special Forces community. I think it was Wooly or Woodsy or Wooby or whatever that was out in Grand Junction, and he manufactured boots and sleeping bags and gear specifically for the JSOC community that was the best in the business. And so Jaeger was always getting that shit, at the lead and had insider track information. And so I remember we met him out one time at that facility, and he was going through some of the gear, and he was a really nice guy. And so we were standing there, and there was a bunch of colonels from the Senate, and there was a bunch of generals that were listening in on the conversation. And there was one guy, and I'll never remember his name, but he was a civilian advisor that came to audit what we were doing. And he said, the question here is, do I want them to have that set of boots or that sleeping bag in their TA-50 when they go to combat? Or do I want them to have Greg's training before they deploy? And everybody got quiet for a minute and said, well, why are we choosing that? And he goes, that's exactly what we're choosing. For every dollar and minute and classroom that we were taking up. Brian, you remember when we were working for the Marine Corps, and you, Shelley, and I were in that shower with the open door shitters, and that was the only place that we could do the training. We were all sitting on MRE boxes inside and projecting on the concrete wall, like at Flores or one of those places. And people were coming in and taking a shower after gym and everything, and the cord kept getting unplugged, or somebody would get electrocuted, and we have to slow down while we're doing CPR. We never invested the same money or mindset or anything in training until when? Until the body bag stopped coming back. So the first time a body bag comes back, everybody goes full speed. Let's stop this. Whether it's cops, whether it's security, doesn't matter what it is. And let's take all these steps. And then there's a flurry of typing, and all the shit goes on the news, and everybody talks a good story and buys a new decal for the vehicle, or red and blue lights or whatever, right? And then what happens is time goes by and we forget all those lessons learned, and we go back to doing shit the same way that we always did it until what? Until the next emergency comes up. And that becomes the historical perspective that we go from, is that, see, I told you we needed that can opener, new light, whatever else the equipment is. We have to stop thinking like that. What we have to do is we have to have a practical answer, because you wrote it. And when you sent me the message that we were doing this, you wrote that no device will ever outperform good judgment under pressure. And I highlighted that, Brian.
Right.
That meant more than any of those other things to me. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it does the work of 3 items. Yeah, it's cheap and it's unbreakable. But you know what? If you can't think your way out from under the situation, you'll never open the pouch that it's hidden in.
And the kind of ironic thing to me with a lot of this is, everyone is concerned, which they should be, about liability, right? And so it's like, okay, well, that this is something we're liable for, so you knew or should have known. But what lawsuits are rarely ever about your lack of hardware, right? That's not where it comes from. They're about lack of justification, or their lack of training or decision making, or all of that stuff that we're talking about. And these mistakes don't happen because of outdated equipment. They're happening because of outdated thinking. And of course some of the cases we're bringing up, the mistakes are happening, again, not because of outdated equipment, because of new equipment. Exactly. The new thing, and it's going to cause issues. And it's like we come to the solution. We go, okay, we slap the table, like you said. Oh, I think this, and yeah, we like what Bill thinks, and you know what, Greg's one of our top guys at that. So if that's what he thinks, we're going with it. It's like, well, hang on. Like, maybe Greg, your opinion is completely correct, 100% right, and it's the standard, and everyone should believe it, and that's what you should do. But your solution has nothing to do with the actual problem, right? It's a solution to something, some extraneous factor.
Yep.
Right, and again, it goes back to just how we are, and man, when anything I see something new coming down, right? It's the whole, okay, great, you gave them a scalpel, but you didn't teach them anything about anatomy. You gave them this thing, but you didn't teach them about the context of it. So it just becomes this abstract thing that I just point to, and you know what? It just works, or it's just this thing that we do. And so when something happens and it goes wrong, I'm fucked. I'm screwed.
Exactly.
I mean,
look at all the money and
it's
time
like
that you invested. Come on.
So, and and obviously we're all about people and humans, and people I've heard it described as the human weapon system, and that's fine. Yep. It's just the human system. You call it that, that's fine. But tools are inert objects. The person utilizing the tool is the weapon system. It's not a gun. It's the person operating the gun. It's not, it's the human interaction with it. And then this goes to how I look at all issues. Like, it's not that drugs aren't the problem. It's drug addiction and people's interaction with the drugs that are the problem. The gun is a piece of metal sitting on a freaking table. So it's the human interaction with the gun that the problem is. And so it all comes back down to that. But when you do that, that you're assigning responsibility to people, and everyone loves doing that in certain situations and saying you're the problem and this is what it is and they got to go. But when it comes to then you accepting responsibility for that, it's like, well, no, if I would have had a better tool, or if we would have had this thing, then I wouldn't have done that. It's like, no, we're not. We haven't mastered sort of vanilla yet. We haven't mastered basics yet. So why are we doing this thing when that situation or that solution to that problem, we could just avoid the problem in the first place? And I don't think we do that, right? We're not very good at, well, which is we make little strides or advancements, or people will say it and they'll go, hey, yeah, that's a great concept or idea, and then they'll turn around and go buy the new thing, and it's like, well, wait a minute,
and tell you to stand down because, well, you don't understand,
or not even tell you to stand down. So like, yeah, we'd love to do that, but we don't have the money. It's like, yes, you do.
That's what I'm trying to say, Brian. That's what I'm trying to say, is that what happens is they turn it into a choice. They turn it into a decision and try to get you on board going, you just don't understand the pressure we're under. This is an immediate thing that we need to do. Yeah, okay. And Wiggies, that's it. Wiggies, the best tools in the world for special forces. Folks, look up wiggies.com, and if you go there, make sure you give a shout out to Brian and I. Holy shit, my memory is horrible. Look, back in the day, that the Edge was the premier self-defense shoot, move, and communicate academy for everybody. And one of the things that we did on the range is we had these little baby paper plates, because they were very cheap at the dollar store, the little white ones with the corrugated edge that were probably, I don't know, 6 inches around. And then we had much less. What would that be? The 3-inch diameter. And then the other ones that were probably 6-inch diameter. I know shit about math. And staple gun. And we would staple those up. And what you were taught to do is, from the holster, then from the ready, from whatever position that you were, you had to put a number of rounds in each one of those targets. Then we would transition to a paper target that was significantly bigger, with a small mark that was on it. And it was that hit the small mark with your bullet, and then make each subsequent bullet touch the hole from the first bullet. And we would work on that under speed and duress. And then at the end of the day, we turned the target over, and it was a human target with all the X rings and the 10 rings and everything else on it. And people go, holy shit, I can't believe I shot that well. Then guess what we did? We deconstructed them by having them shoot at those targets, and they couldn't hit a gosh damn thing. So what's the worst thing when you're shooting? It's you, how you think under pressure, the pressure that you put yourself under, because the tool that you have, the firearm and the bullets, are manufactured to specification to fire and function the same way every time. So if you put them in a gosh damn machine and a vise and held them there, they would never miss, okay? There would have to be a malfunction for them to miss. So what's the thing that continues to go wrong with systems? And that's the person, the human capital that you have out on the street every day. No matter what that human is doing, whether they're a school security guard or they're working for your HR or anything else, it's how they perceive, anticipate, how they react to whatever is going on. And Brian, I can tell there's still a problem, because we still, after the shooting at the Jewish Museum, what do we get? We get, pre-attack indications. Let's look them up. Yeah, okay, let's laminate that. Just saying pre-attack, that takes us down the wrong road. Understanding anomalous behavior is much more important than whether it's a 9mm or a 40 cal. But why do we fight that? Lowest common denominator. It's much easier to go to my range instructor. It's much easier to go to my driving instructor or my self-defense instructor and ask them, what's the flavor of the day? Nobody would argue right now, jiu-jitsu is the flavor of the day for police, okay? Is that going to be the same in 11 years? Nope, not even close. Okay, and I'll predict that right now. I won't be around, but Brian.
Well,
it comes
it's
back
funny how fast it went from, hey, all the data and all the research shows that, mobility is survivability. And if you go to the ground, you are X amount more likely to get killed or get into this situation or have something bad happen to you. So you don't ever want to, be on the ground. And then that was quickly reversed to you're going to the ground. And it's like, again,
so what's
we
my
just had a complete flip flop there, or is it like?
What's my argument constantly with On Coffee Table? Okay, writes a number of books.
Yeah.
He's very popular. He's out there. First of all, he's not a police expert. You don't qualify as a police expert by speaking to cops or writing a book to cops. That's not how that works. Second part of that is a lot of his research is based on SLA Marshall's work. And when you go back and you start taking a look at faulty research methods, how many people can we in our industry go back and point to where they went and took the wrong exit, Brian, and just stayed with it for a good long time? And there's stuff people still quote it. And it's like anybody in situational awareness that says, hey, the OODA loop is the most important thing. Cool your jets, Romeo. The problem is that you're not seeing the big picture because you're too close to it and you're making money. The idea is put your boots on the ground inside of that circle, doing Kodokan judo and fight your way out. Well, how do you do that? Good judgment under pressure. And what does that mean? Cognitive. What does that mean? Strategy. If you use a good strategy, you will overcome any opponent. And that means predicting and not getting into the situation. So what happened with the airlines? The airline goes, let's just put on a bigger engine. And somebody in the back of the room yelled out, you know what? That's brilliant. We already got pilots that can do that. And then when they had a problem, what did they do?
And
what did they do? What was their flash to bang on that, Brian? Well, let's put another machine on there that counteracts whatever the human pilot is doing.
So, right. And so now it's machine on machine on machine. And it's like, well, hang on here. We're in a new domain. We've lost them. We've lost the plot here, on what we're trying to do. And those are some of the common mistakes in any type of resource allocation. You brought it up as like, okay, we're choosing between something, or there's a finite amount of resources and time, right? So we have to figure out what's the ROI, what's the best bang for the buck. And so the like we've talked about, the tech solution is always the simple answer, but if I'm not also incorporating some sort of training timeline and pipeline and detailed implementation plan, that could completely backfire. And then, so that means if you have a new tool, new piece of gear, but you're still using old SOPs, that 737 is going to crash. Like it's going to crash and burn and kill everyone. So that's the whole thing. So it's like, if you're going to have these hardware upgrades, you have to have sort of or software or mindset upgrade or training upgrade for the individual. And I think that's always the necessity. And then from that, you don't always necessarily need a hardware upgrade. So if you're cutting out that training to afford some piece of gear, whatever that is, like, you have to realize that then and say, well,
and who's paying for that?
You have to give something. You have to give something up in order to gain something, right? Always.
Exactly
No matter what it is, you always have to give something up in order to gain something. So what are you gaining versus what you're giving up? Are you getting the value there? That's just a life, you could there's a life motto, right? You have to give something up in order to gain something. So as long as what you're gaining is greater, has greater return on investment, is more effective for you, is a net positive than what you're giving up, then you're doing okay, right? You're doing good, right? But that's not always the case in these. And so, this the buy before we analyze it, this is going to make us safer. That's not a strategy. It's just not. I mean, and that's it's where are you starting with this? I think is my biggest issue with this. And plus, you just talked about all the range stuff, and I agree, and I'm not bashing anything that people are doing, and I certainly don't get into tactics, techniques, and procedures, but when you say like, hey, you got to be able to think critically under pressure, you got to, we got to have this level of skill. It's like, well, you're still talking about the human, and a lot of that stuff came from especially like the tier 1 military units, and it's like, well, look, they can think through the situation and think under pressure because there isn't pressure yet, because they've fired so many gosh darn rounds that they can't miss if they tried, right? I mean, it's just like the tier 1, the special mission units that do a lot of like hostage rescue stuff like that, right? I trained and worked with those guys, and it's like, we do so many reps in training that you just won't get it wrong. You can't, because you only know how to do this right thing. So when something comes up that's non-standard, you're not overwhelmed in the situation. Your cognitive load is less because you've done it so many times. Well, guess what? That takes years and years and years and years of training experience to get to.
Training dollars.
So,
Exactly.
so the military, tier 1 unit, well, they have that time, they have that luxury, they have that budget, they have they can afford to do that.
Yep.
But most places can't. Those are the only types of places that you can get away with that kind of stuff at. And so it's like we're not even looking at where our failures are really happening. And the reason I was bringing up the range stuff is in the decision making in that too. That has to do with the sort of the cognitive load in those situations. But more gear equals more complexity, which equals more points of failure. I mean, the more things you throw at it, the more likely something is to go wrong. And so each new tool you introduce, you got to reorient, you got to get reps, you got to have the right context to make it use effectively. And so if you're doing all of that additional training that you know you're going to have to do when we get this new thing, is it worth it? Or do we just do some new type of training, save our money on the new thing, and figure out what the real problem is? And it's like that analysis is never done.
Let's shit in a punch bowl, shall we? And let's serve it up fresh to everybody, because we get a lot of trainers that are on here too. So if you're a cop and you're a trainer, answer the following question. Have you ever been on a homicide or a suicide where it was a .22 long rifle? Yes. Yeah. What about a 32? What about a 38? What about a 9? Go all the way through the different calibers to the worst handgun, which was a single shot pocket Derringer, all the way up to an M98 Barrett with a 50 cal. You've seen them all. Okay. So it's more important for shot placement, but we all talk about stopping power. Why do we talk about stopping power? Because of fear. Why do we talk about it? For fear? Because we saw the Norco bank robbery. We saw the West Hollywood. We saw the agents in Florida get overwhelmed when they went to make the traffic stop and the guys outgunned them. We saw the coppers from California Highway Patrol laying on the slab in the morgue. And we say never again. That's never going to happen. So we have leather gear with higher capacity magazines. And then, now what we're doing is we're chasing the gear. And what we should be chasing is the critical thinking. Because if you can outthink a cunning opponent, we know from the pathology that you can kill somebody with a 22 or a 38 or a 32 or a gosh damn slingshot, or a nut or a bolt that came off the neighbor's lawnmower. So we understand physics. That's something we can wrap our brains around. But what we don't understand is how critical thinking will trump any new tool, any new resource that you try to bring to bear. The age-old problem before deployment in Iraq, what's the turning radius on this Vic? And none of them knew. And how far can it run if you get shot in the oil pan? And none of them knew. And Brian, you remember that. You teacher and I, we dropped the mic and walked off the range because we didn't want to die with those idiots when they were in combat. They were shipping all that gear over, and not one person asked the question, hey, what happens if we hit and the airbag deploys? Is the Vic out of service? What happens if we get T-boned in the intersection and the vehicle shuts off? Do you remember those? And Brian, that's that now. I don't know time, but that's like 20 years ago now that we were asking those questions. What happened to that? What happened to the curiosity, Brian, where all of a sudden somebody in the back, Gutenberg, raises their hand and says, I'm Minuten better. This doesn't sound like the best idea. But we've gone past that because new shit looks cool. And it's a race gun. And now I want to be like a fast roper. That's not your job. The more time you're spending on the range, you're not on the road. The more time you're spending flipping those tires, you're not out meeting your community. Now, do I say that they can exist in the same space? Of course they can. But that's what you should be working on. You should be working on your strategic, operational, tactical plans, not buying new gear and spending all that money you don't have.
Here's, it comes down to, the kind of like, well, what questions should we be asking, and how do we analyze it? How do we get to the kind of, how do we actually scope the problem? And, these are really good questions to ask, but the problem is they have been kind of like you alluded to of your person in the board meeting at the beginning of this talk of, how do we scale this? It's like, wait, you haven't solved the problem yet. Or
that was John Douchebag.
What problem does it solve? It's not that though. Like, because what those questions do is it forces you to clearly define
Granted.
what the problem is. And when you go through those simple thought experiments, you go, oh, wait a minute. We're not really approaching this correctly. Like or we're not being clear in this area. And so I always do obviously is what problems to solve, but it's like, what is the actual performance gap? I actually just even this morning, you saw, Gary Klein, Dr. Klein, who we had on, who we love. He posted something about, he's like, look, when people do historical perspective and they do these case studies, they do whatever, we're often obsessed with, or we get enlightened to what happened, meaning, okay, here was the time, here's the maps, here's the decision that was made, here's the caliber, or here's this, whatever. It's like, well, but we don't ever get into sort of, well, what contributed to these decisions? Why did they do that? What were all of these contributing factors? Because if I can break those down into three biggest ones, I know, well, these are the three biggest, and then I can go back to other situations. Well, wait a minute, these are all the same three. Wait, these are the same three contributing factors. So it has nothing to do.
You know what I mean? Sometimes it's something you never expected. It's dehydration. It's lack of sleep. It's that person didn't understand the graffiti. It's something simple many times.
It's saying what's his name, Gabriel Princip, assassinated Archduke, Ferdinand, and that started World War I. It's like no, that was not. That's exactly not. That was that. What did that come as? No, that lit the kindling that was sitting there soaking in gasoline and mounting and mounting and mounting. But all that stuff was the issue, not him carrying out that one single act. It wasn't that. It was all of this other stuff. And so it's like, what is the performance gap? What are the costs of not investing in our people? And even I see it pop. I still see it pop up like once a year on LinkedIn, where someone posts it was attributed to Steve Jobs or whoever. Probably no one ever said this, but it's like clickbait. But it's like where it's like they said, well, hey, we got to train up these people, we got to do all this, and it's like, well, what if we train them up and we give them all these skills and all these resources, and they leave and they go to another company? And the response is, okay, well, what if we do all that stuff, or what if we don't do any of that and they stay here? And they don't leave. And it's like, oh, yeah, like I get that. You have to look at it in that way. But, where these questions, where do most of our critical incidents begin and where do they go wrong? Like, where did it actually begin? Where did this start? Because we often get laser focused on just that. Here's the problem. It's like, no. Wind that tape back. So where do those begin?
Why do we love the NTSB, Brian? Why? Because they're the most introspective agency that we know. They're constantly going, how many hours did he fly? What plane was it? What was the barometric pressure? What were the weather conditions at the station? What was the radio? Look, we never do that. What we do is we get a PIO to stand in front of people and go, look, he had a gun. Look, he had a gun. Look here, while we slow down the tape, he had a gun and turned on our officers. Why? Because, again, fear drives how we're after action reviewing those incidents. Yeah. And we see that every day. I'll tell you what, you epitomized this discussion when you sent me, if you removed all your high-speed gear, would your people still make good decisions? You know what? If you're listening to the sound of my voice, write down Brian's words and ask yourself that question, and then ask a friend that question. If you removed all the high-speed tack gear, all that cool stuff that you got, would your people on the road still be making good decisions? Would your people in the classroom, would your employee at the cashier or at customer service? Because that's what it applies to. It applies to improving yourself, right?
Well, yeah, because it's like, okay, if you got rid of all of the tools, would the person still be able to solve the problem? Would they still be able to do it? But here's the thing. People will not. How many organizations do we work with where they are unwilling to answer that or ask that question? Because now what? Well, now I know what the problem is. Now I'm liable for it if something happens, and we have staffing people. We still need. It's like, well, that's not you just identified a problem child. Like you always give the example, everyone's got someone when things go wrong and you got person A is on it. It's like, who's there? Oh, person A, send them everything they need. Just do what they tell you. Wait, who's there? Oh, person B, get them out of there and go send person A. It's like, well, if you already know that right now, you've identified what the fucking problem is. And so you actually are liable now because if you can go back and say that and you knew, then it's part of the it's dead weight at that point. They're not providing a value to the organization.
So I had one personal situation I'd like to share because I want to tell my story. So here we are in Afghanistan working with the Ministry of Interior. And they say, listen, working with our coalition partners, we'd like to develop a patch because patches were more important than coins back then. And let's have a good design patch. And every single one of them had a rifle and a lightning bolt and a machete and an explosion and all those other things. And I said, well, what about Shana Bashana? What about standing shoulder to shoulder? And they go, okay, well, we can put that on there, of course, but what else would we put on? I go, wheelbarrow and a shovel and a rake. And they laughed me out of the room, Brian. They laughed me out of the room. A couple of weeks later, I get a call and goes, hey, can you come back and see General, I can't pronounce his name. And I go, yeah. And we go back and here's all the reps in the room. And they go, hey, we like that patch design. You know what? We are so hung up on being the force. You know that in other countries, when you see a shield, that means defense. When you see that on an American patch, that means we're going to use the shield to beat you down and then hook you up and drag you out of there. It's all in perception. And the perception of having the high-speed equipment is for you to placate the people that work with you and for them not to be scared. And right now, take a big dose of SDF up because you're saying, I'm not afraid when I go on the road. Of course you are. If you weren't, you wouldn't have all that stuff. You would invest in your A game, and your A game is critical thinking. That's the performance gap. You know what? Report writing, talking to people, walking up and carrying on a conversation. Brian, that's where your money is right there. Because if you can do that and you can shoot reasonably well, you'll be fine, right? But that's not where we start thinking. Would you agree? I mean, you're an expert, a subject matter expert.
I am, but that goes back to a lot of that really has to do with how we measure things, right? There's a great, I don't know who said it. I think John Peters uses a lot, but where it's not everything that we measure matters, and not everything that matters gets measured. And so how do you do that? Because and this goes into even like the PT standards, physical training and how that stuff changes. And everyone's like, well, you should have to be able to do this. And you should have to, it's like, in no way, let me be very clear, in no way do any of those exercises and the time you get on those exercises translate to how you will perform your job under pressure. They just don't. Obviously, you want to be in better shape. You want to do this, but that's not the thing but because I can measure it, because I can time your mile run, Greg, because I can count how many pull-ups you can do. Well, it's easy for me. But I can measure, or I can score your target, right? I can score that. I can say, well, here's the number, and that's either a pass or that's a fail, or that's, need retraining or new this. And so it's very simple. It's very, 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 very fucking simple, right? Is it inches? Is it meters? Is it money? How are we measuring this? It's like, well, what about outcomes? And this has gone even, especially with policy too. I mean, how many times have you seen like a politician or someone be like, oh, and we spent this much money on, this initiative. It's like, that's not a measurement of performance. The amount of money you spent, that's the cost. That's not measuring the outcome. What did we get from that? What came of doing this? What came from it? And because it's a little bit more complex, people stay away from it. And they go, well, I can't justify that in a budget. It's like, well, if you're thinking in terms of yearly budgets, then you're fucked. There will be zero improvement. And that's my biggest thing about any plan coming in, especially I always, politicians are just a great example. No one goes running for the mayor of a metropolitan city saying, here's my 10, 15, and 20-year plan for reducing crime in the city. Not one fucking one does that. Why? Right. Because, well, that's kind of hard to measure. But I can point at this number thing right here, even though that might have to do with we were on a lockdown and things changed, and then the economy changed, and this, like, all of these extraneous factors might have been the issue, that not anything that you did. In fact, some of the stuff that you did may have had a negative impact on it. So we don't know how to measure this stuff, and I that's just very. I like that. Then it becomes implicitly hard to understand as a human what I'm getting out of something, because I have to see it. I have to feel it. Even our private sector clients, Greg, what did we hear from someone who said, you know what? I was hesitant. I didn't buy into any of this stuff, but you know what? Everyone said you guys were the best and you got to bring them in. And oh my God, I am completely bought in. I never knew we were going to get this much out of it. I never knew that was going to happen because
And why? Because they
they've never
saw the
seen anything like
immediate
that.
results, and they saw
Right.
tangible results. Brian, last night on the news, Blagojevich from Illinois, your boy,
Oh, my boy.
was on
Blago.
he was on pointing and counseling people and taking them to task. And I'm thinking, wow, did you learn that when you were in prison? The
Well,
idea
that's
is
the
that
thing.
when
Well, so
somebody's
here's the
talking
thing about
this,
him. Like
yeah,
he was, kind of railroaded by political corruption,
of course he was.
and he was also a part of political corruption. So it's like
Exactly. He
you can't
welcomed it
you can't
openly.
you can't be the perpetrator and the victim. Like that doesn't
But
that doesn't work.
But what I thought and wrote down when I was watching him last night, and you're spot on. And I love Brian's a Chicago boy. When he talks about laws and legal and bending rules and stuff, I listen because I understand he's got a different perspective. But I was thinking last night when I was watching him that, you know what? You will see an increase in your home security if you only have a sign that says this property is protected by so and so alarm system. It's a
Yeah,
fact. But
it's
if you
true.
put that up, okay,
Yep.
if you close your gate, just latch your gate when you go to work, it will increase your safety and security at home. But folks, if your life depends on it, at the end of the day, it's just a fucking sign. And somebody is going to call you on it, and somebody's going to climb that fence, and they're going to poke their head in your house.
Yep.
So are you prepared for that? So all these talismans, all these totems that you're waving out there, hey, this thing is going to be it. There's going to be a new thing, and Guns and Ammo is going to
There's
copy
gonna be a
on
new
it, and
thing.
Car and Driver, and now you're going to say, did we save a life by spending that 1.8 or 3.6 or whatever $1 million? And I'll shut up after I say this. Do you remember the gosh damn camouflage pattern for the Navy that made it impossible if you fell overboard
To see.
to see you? Okay. Do I need to say more? And anybody out there that's in the
The
Navy, thank you.
blueberries.
Okay. But remember we used them
The,
as role
the,
players, and it was like, what the hell is that?
yeah.
Well, somebody thought that one out.
Yeah.
Come on. Where are we? Where are we in this? And you know what? If you removed all that high speed gear, are you people still making good decisions? And if they're not, you're wrong. And it's okay to throw in the towel and back up and start over. Tabula rasa, reset is not a bad place to be sometimes.
Yeah, and again, I'm not, anti gear or anti new tech. I just I don't think a lot of places need to be concerned with it. Meaning, some of those things are going to work themselves out over time, and there's always
Yes,
going to be a new thing. You don't have to be on top of every little thing that's happening and new thing. It's just not, because some of them are going to go away, and some of them are going to stick around. And when it sticks around, go, okay, I guess I'll use that then. I mean, it's not a lack of innovation or
no,
not, being forward thinking. It's going, well, here's what we know works, and that's going to be the bedrock foundation of everything that we do. And then
exactly.
as new things come in, right, I can ask the appropriate questions, adopt them if I think it'll help me in the way we do things, because it should come from you. How many places have we been where it's like, well, we got to get them better at this, and their decision making needs to get a little bit better, and it's difficult because it's complex. It's like, here, does this decision, this thing you're about to do, is it aligned with the vision, the mission, and the values of your organization? Well, no. Okay, then don't fucking do it.
You got it.
Or change the vision, mission, and values, or change what it is that you're doing. All right,
Yep.
if that's what you have, because then you'll identify, oh, wait a minute, we're not doing things correctly. We actually do have to do
Exactly.
this.
And if you
I mean,
are an influencer, Brian, if you influence decisions at your agency, remember that by adding to the cumulative load and by adding to the cognitive load, you're not doing anybody any favors, because what you're doing is you're making a situation more complex. And the more complex it is, the more chances for friction points or points of failure. And because you don't have the time and the money to try it as an experiment at some small agency within your community or whatever else, then it's prone that you're going to have your biggest failure right on the street, right in front of everybody. Is that the place we need to go? Is that the decision we're trying to make here?
so when I was still in a world where I had to stay proficient and and qualified on different weapon systems, right? So it was a whole bunch of different ones. And so the way I shot was like with my supporting hand, which is my left hand, I had a specific way, which a lot of people do. And I would sort of have my like thumb pointed straight out, accompanying that side or accompanying my hand if it was in a pistol. And it's like, because people go, well, you can hold it this way and then you can move this over and you can move your arm here and do that. And I go, yeah, that's great. But here's the thing. This manner in which I hold this pistol is the exact same way I can hold that M4 and that REM 870 and that M203. And so I learned one way and I can use it in a whole bunch of different weapon systems in different
Cognitive
situations.
efficiency.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's not I don't have to think about it. It becomes the way I do things. And it was like such a simple way for some people to see like, oh, I get it. If you do things one way, and you can use that in a multitude of uses, that's better than learning 17 different things or 10 different ways of doing something or all of these different. It's like, dude, you got to simplify. You got to take it's like your first deployment or first time ever doing something compared to like later in life. Like, my first deployment, dude, I had every mag pouch filled. I had a drop mag pouch that I carried and it was on, man. And then years later, I was like, hey, do you have anyone got a rifle or pistol for me to carry? Because I would love to have one. It's like, because get rid of all that stuff.
Think about that with your TA-50. I remember every time that I deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, the military sent me with every piece of issued gear that I had. And there was me with front and back and duffel bag drag and everything else till I got to my unit that was going to start my, rotation through that country. And guess what I did? I threw everything in a Connex. And when I was flying back out of that country, they reintroduced me with all that gear. There was not one of those items I ever used. So turning that shit back in was pretty easy. What happens is you're taking up part of my load that could be used for other things, salient things that we sat down and thought about and said, this trumps that. No fight there. And then the second part is, Brian, a cognitive efficiency makes it easier for me when I'm in a situation. It takes items off of the table so I can consider the products at hand and come up with a strategy, not be reactive mode all the time. So these are the problems we need to be solving, buddy. This is it.
And I guess my kind of final word would just be that, if you can afford the gear and the training, great. But if you have to choose, man, just always choose people. Always bet on people.
I agree.
They're going to be there anyway. There always has to have a person there. So why wouldn't you want to invest in that individual as much as possible? So
and Brian, if I had to give a final quote, because it's a great episode, I love talking about it. It would be to quote Balin out loud: "It's raining vaginas." So I mean, that just epitomizes how
I'm not familiar with that one.
That's a young girl that has Tourette's, and it's a great show. And every once in a while, she slips a zinger out in the public, and just you watch if people get fallen with that. So I'll send you a photo.
Really. Yeah, well, you lost me on that one. I'm gonna have to look that up on YouTube after this, unless it's not
Balin
on YouTube.
Out Loud, my favorite show now.
Oh my gosh. All right, I'm gonna have to do my homework on that one. But all right, well, we covered a lot. If anyone obviously has any questions, just reach out to us. humanbehaviorpodcast@gmail.com. Go to the Patreon. There's more on there. You can get recap of everything we talked about. You can ask us questions and give us ideas on there or things that you were thinking about. And I think that's about it. But we covered a lot. But I appreciate everyone. Yeah. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and for our Patreon members who support us. Keep up the suggestions and questions. We like hearing from you all. Thank you all for listening to the episode. And then if you could give us a like or a thumbs up or rating in the best way. Even if you can't do the Patreon, just share an episode with a friend. Say, hey, check these guys out. It really helps us out a lot in getting the message out. So I would appreciate that. But thanks everyone, and don't forget that training changes behavior.